That wasn't too bad. Got going. Well, good morning to everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. It felt weird not being here last week. But the good news is, my family's here. And we'll stand and sing. And the kids just love when I preach long sermons. So we're going to go at least 2.5 hours. No, I'm joking. You'll be out in plenty of time to watch the Packers game, which I think starts at 2:30. So you'll be good to go. I have questions to start, and it's this. What is the essence of Christian living? Not an easy question to answer. What is the essence of Christian living? We talk about the fruit of the Spirit. And they're all basically essentials. We've talked about love and joy, peace, patience. Today we're going to talk a little bit about kindness. And they're all essential because they all point to our story. We all have a story to tell. There are 6 billion people, approximately, in the world with 6 billion different stories. You think about even the people today. We're all here, right now. But think of all the different things that had to happen exactly the way they had to happen in order for you to be here right now listening to me. A lot had to happen. We each have a story to tell. Now, the Bible is full of stories. This is a very interesting one. Anybody know what this is? Balaam and Balak. Well, Balak's not in there. But long story short, Balak was kind of a mean old king from Moab, and he wanted to get rid of the Israelites. So Balaam the prophet had to go talk to him, courtesy of God. And he rode, I don't know if you can see it, but he rode his trusty donkey over to meet him. Now, along the way, the donkey hallucinated. It's a true story. This is not a preacher's story. This is an actual story. And then he sees an angel and he stops, and Balaam the prophet whips him and beats him a couple times. And here's the kicker, pardon the pun. After a couple times, what does the donkey do? The donkey actually opens his mouth and talks to him. He says, "What have I done to make you beat me?" It reminds you of Mr. Ed a little bit. But you know, it really happened, and that's my point. It seems silly, it seems a little goofy, but it's no more or less valid than any other story you'll read about in the Bible. Here's where I'm going with this. We're going to talk about Paul, and his story is amazing. The character arc is just out of hand in a good way. Where do you fit in God's story? There are 2 stories weaved into every story in the Bible. There's God's story, and then there's your story. Our story, that's our perspective. That's the here and now. What did you do this morning? You woke up, you brushed your teeth, hopefully. You got washed, you got dressed, ate breakfast, talked to your family, and then you drove to church. That is your story this morning. What's God's story, though? You see, God is so far ahead of us. We're on page 8, and God's on page 108. Where our story is weaved in with Him, that's what's known as the upper story. So how His perspective meets ours, that is His story. That's why when we talk about someone like Paul, it never ceases to amaze me what God did with him. So this is our main verses for the next few weeks. And today we talk about kindness. Next week will be goodness, and we'll do a few more, and then we'll get into Jonah. Do you consider yourself a kind person? Would you really admit if you didn't consider yourself a kind person? You're like, well, maybe. Kindness has been defined as a language that deaf people can hear and blind people can see. Not everybody has this gift. But the people that Paul was about to encounter toward the end of his very long journey in Acts, well, they exhibited this kindness. If you're not familiar with the book of Acts, or even if you were, you know that it kind of plays out like a movie. There's twists, and there's turns, and then there's Peter at the beginning, and Paul really takes over. Paul's story is amazing. We don't have time to get through all of it. His conversion was incredible. The way he talked and met with other people, insane, right? But what happens to him at the end? Well, before he's arrested again, it seems like this happens all the time with Paul, right? So Paul meets with the Ephesian elders later on in his story, and they wish him goodbye, and they embrace, and we're all going to miss each other, and I'll write to you, and all that. So then Paul is on his way where? To Jerusalem. You'll never guess what happens to Paul when he's in Jerusalem. He gets arrested. And not only is he arrested, but now the Jews plot to kill him. So Paul and his friends get wind of this, and they say, all right, we're going to transfer you to Caesarea, which is in the northern part of Israel, by the way. And when he's there, and this is Reader's Digest version, when he's there is a trial before a couple of the Roman governors. The first is Felix, who sends him to Festus. Now, Festus says to Paul, you are out of your mind, Paul. Your great learning is driving you insane. That's Acts chapter 26, verse 24. So at this point, he's still a prisoner. And where does Paul go? He goes to Rome. Only he sails to Rome with 276 of his closest friends. All these sailors go with him. Now, since this is Paul, nothing goes smoothly. So what happens along the way? There's a big shipwreck. Hence the title of today's lesson, A Shipwreck, a Snake, and a Safe Haven. So, there's a big shipwreck. For 14 days, they are without food. You know, I'm looking at the clock. I haven't eaten in about 17 minutes, and I'm already hungry. These people went 14 days without food. 276 people on board. Guess what? You know how many people perished? 0. You talk about an upper story. You talk about God advancing a tale. This is it. So they finally landed on the island of Malta. Do we know anything about Malta? Very quick background. It's in the center of the Mediterranean, just south of Sicily in southern Europe. It's about 660 miles from Rome. So not exactly walking distance, I would say. About there's about 388,000 people in all of Malta. 122 square miles. In comparison, the city of Philadelphia is 142 square miles. I think Chicago is something like 234. Correct me if I'm wrong, square miles. So Malta, relatively speaking, is pretty small. So we're going to talk about Acts 28, verses 1 through 10. Who is the author of Acts, everybody? Who wrote Acts? Luke, right. So Luke, he also wrote a gospel. Hope you know that. As you'll see, are we there yet? Yeah, we see the pronoun we a few times in the book of Acts. Why does Luke do that? Because he wants to kind of serve that as evidence, as proof that he was there with Paul and his companions. So let's go ahead and we'll read the first 2 verses. Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. Okay, we'll stop there. The islanders, they were also known as barbarians. And in the Greco-Roman world, there were essentially 3 types of people. You had the Greeks, the Jews, and the barbarians. How do you think the barbarians were viewed by the rest of the Greco-Roman world? As very uncivilized people. They didn't hold much weight. But what did they do here? They showed unusual kindness. And that's the NIV. If you have the New American Standard, it actually says extraordinary kindness. If you have the Message, I don't know if you ever have read the Message. It's not a great tool for preaching, but it is an interesting translation. It says, they went out of their way to be friendly to us. They went out of their way. And the Greek version actually has a word called philanthropion, which oddly enough is philanthropy. What does that mean? We all know what it's like to be philanthropic, right? We desire to promote the welfare of others, to create a situation where I consider your interests more important than my own. That's the very essence of servant leadership. What does Paul write to in 2:3 in Philippians? He says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or what? Or vain conceit. In humility, value others above yourself." Now, these people probably didn't have wonderful, huge houses like you see today. The Islanders I'm talking about. But what did they do? They certainly were hospitable. And they welcomed Paul and his group into their homes. I have been so blessed in my time here. So many people have opened their homes to me and now my family. And I won't name people because I'm going to leave someone out. And I don't want to do that. But there are just certain people who make you feel at home. And there are other people who make you wish you were at home. But fortunately, those don't exist here. So the natives welcomed Paul and his group. They probably thought, if they didn't get a whole lot of visitors, mind you, they probably thought it was really strange to see all these strangers. Although, as noted theologian and my 10-year-old daughter likes to say, Eliza Wolf, once you talk to someone, he's no longer a stranger. There you go. He or she, thank you, is no longer a stranger. So these people were cold. They were hungry, probably really tired. No doubt at least a few of them were ill. And yet they were brought in. Now there's a difference between hospitality and giving. And anyone can write out a check and send it to your favorite charity. And by the way, that's a good thing. I'm not knocking that. But what's easier to do? Me to write a check and give it to you and say, go on your way? Or, you know what, Karen, it's good to see you. Why don't you come into my house and I'll cook you a meal? Well, you wouldn't want me to cook it, but Michelle would cook you a meal. See, that's hospitality. And that's what people here are so good at. You probably don't even realize it because you're immersed in this culture. But from an outsider's perspective, I'm going to tell you, give yourself a pat on the back. It's not easy for people to do that. Luke, who wrote Acts, also wrote his gospel. And his gospel, more than any of the others, he talks about table fellowship. Who did Jesus eat with? Sinners, tax collectors. He ate on the Sabbath with lawyers and Pharisees. And what about that wee little man? Remember him? What was his name? Zacchaeus. All the kids should know that because of that song. He spent time with Zacchaeus, turned his life around because he was being hospitable and kind. Now, sometimes, and maybe you're thinking, well, you're talking about Jesus, okay? Of course, it's easy for him. I mean, he's God. Okay, true. Sometimes hospitality and kindness comes from a very surprising source. Like in the case of a social worker who lives in the Bronx by the name of Julio Diaz. Julio Diaz got off the train one night, as he does every night. The difference is, this night, kind of a tough-looking teenager approached him with a knife and basically said, "Give me your wallet or else." So at that point, Julio, of course, gives him his wallet. And then as this kid is walking away, Julio said something very interesting. He said, "Hey, wait a minute. You forgot something." What did you forget? You know what? Hold that thought. We'll get to the end of that later. Because we all have a story to tell. But I need to share this with you first. Verses 3 through 6. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god. Stop there. What was Paul by trade? He was a what? He was a tent maker. Do you think he knew how to use his hands? Probably. And remember when we talked about Nehemiah? Nehemiah didn't have to get down and dirty with his people. Paul's doing the same thing. He's the one who gathered the pile. He's the one who got the brush. He didn't have to do any of that. Yet he did anyway, because he knew about servant leadership. Nothing is beneath him. And oh, by the way, this whole thing with the snake and the viper, does it seem out of place? It seems a little odd, doesn't it, that they kind of put it in the middle of there? Although here's why it's not. There was a Greek story, or a Greek poem, which tells of a murderer who actually escaped from a storm at sea. He was shipwrecked on the Libyan coast, and guess what happened to him? He was killed by a viper. So they just assumed, well, they're talking about Paul. Although when he didn't die, well, he must be a god. Now, how do you think Paul felt about being referred to this way? Are there any other precedents? Remember earlier in Acts chapter 14, Paul and Barnabas are in Lystra, and they refer to him as gods. And what does Paul say to them? He says, friends, why are you doing this? We are only human like you. So Luke knew better. Verses 7 through 10, we'll finish it out. There was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us to his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him, and after prayer, placed his hands on him and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with the supplies we needed. Okay, so this is kind of like the second half of what's going on here. So who is this guy Publius? He's essentially the governor, right? He's the chief official, the leading citizen. He was very kind. He could have thrown these guys out and said, we don't want him. We gave it the office, right? But he didn't. He showed kindness to them. Now, think of the chief leading citizen of your neighborhood. Think of, not to get political, but say Rahm Emanuel, or what's the governor's name, Rauner? Can you imagine them doing something like this? Really, of any state. If they show that much kindness, I don't know. But what does Paul do now? He plays the role of a healer. Does this story, this healing story, remind us of anything else that may or may not have happened in Luke's gospel? Luke 4, 38 through 40. Speaking of Jesus, of course. Jesus left the synagogue and went to the home of Simon. That's Peter. Now Simon's mother-in-law was suffering from a high fever, and they asked Jesus to help her. So he bent over and rebuked the fever, and it left her. She got up at once and began to wait on them. At sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, he healed them. This is not the equation that will always work, but in this particular case, hospitality and kindness led to what? It led to recovery. It led to healing. Both sides benefit here. It's a win-win. And here's the thing. These islanders, do you think they realized who Paul was? I don't think they got email at that particular point saying, hey, Paul's coming, and he's apostle of Jesus Christ. They had no idea what they were doing. That's the thing. And look, I'm not telling you things that you don't know. And I'm also not saying if you're kind to someone, life will be great. That's not how it works. But you never know. I'd rather be kind to a complete stranger, not knowing anything about this person, than be kind to someone I do know. And here's why. Not that didn't come out right. I'd rather be kind to someone I don't know, and here's why. You have no idea who that could be. You have no idea what his story is. You have no idea about her upbringing. What I meant to say was I'd rather be kind to that person than be unkind to someone I already know because I feel comfortable with them. See what I mean? We are all God's children, particularly if we are Christians. So the recovery, the healing, that led to helping Paul as well. The islanders ended up honoring them and gave them supplies. So look at the perspective here. The people witnessing all this, the sailors, the islanders, everybody else, the men, the women, the children, what were they witnessing more than anything else? They saw the splendor of Christ, and they didn't even realize it. So what happens next? Paul and his crew were there for 3 more months. Doesn't say a whole lot. Now, you would think at that point, during the 3 months, it's very possible someone was baptized, if not multiple people. If nothing else, they certainly were affected by Paul. Few men